Welcome to the Comedy Reset Spotlight. This is the place to be if you want to hear from some of the most innovative and exciting comedy creators from around the globe. On this podcast, you'll hear from a variety of guests who are pushing the boundaries of what comedy can be. If you're looking for fresh perspectives and new ideas, this is the podcast for you.
Episode 11. From Ontario, Canada, comedian Barry James.
When did you first start doing stand-up comedy?
I started doing comedy about the tail end of 2019. Maybe not the best timing for something like that, but honestly, I got really lucky. I did 3 open mics, and then through someone I met on one of those shows, I got booked on an actual booked show. So that was the one you invite all your family and friends to, and that one went really well. And then through that, I got booked for an actual paid gig. It was a little hole-in-the-wall restaurant. The pay was very minimal, but you know what? This was my 5th time on stage, and I got paid. That's the best thing ever, right? So, and then I was going to be booked for another one, and then something happened towards the end of 2019. Early 20s, and that kind of made me take a hiatus for a couple of years. So I never quite got the hang of doing the online comedy like everyone else was, and I needed an audience, so I just kind of laid low, worked on my material, stayed inside, and then waited for everything to get back to normal, which it seems to be now. So we're making strides for a comeback.
What made you want to become a stand-up comedian?
That's a tough one. When I hit my 40s, I just kind of got into this midlife crisis mode. And instead of getting a flashy car or leaving my wife for a stripper or any of that, stuff you would expect, I just started picking up random hobbies, like literally anything creative that I had a passing interest in. I was doing video game development for a while. I picked up the guitar, keyboard, I was learning music. Started writing. I was going to write the great novel. I did wrestling. I announced for pro wrestling for a little bit there. I got a kick out of that. So just anything that, struck my attention at the time. And one of the things was I decided, I'm going to take the shot. I'm going to do stand-up one time, see how that goes. And it was just different than everything else I had tried. This one sung to me, as they say, and it made me want to be better, and I wanted to improve. I wanted to learn it, not just get up there and tell random jokes. I wanted to actually understand what I was doing. I wanted to improve. I wanted to make something of it, and I wanted to be better than everyone else. And that will never happen because there are some absolute legends in the world. But I think that mindset and that little bit of ego is what keeps me moving and keeps me growing and keeps me getting better. So, I've chosen to keep that attitude, and I'm just really, I feel like I found it with the stand-up and, comedy in general. And I'm just pushing forward on that now.
Who were some of your influences?
Oh, wow. There are so many. Honestly, anyone that's ever drawn a dime in this business, I think I've either wanted to emulate or learn from or just be. But I guess growing up, it was just television. They say don't let television be a babysitter. My folks maybe didn't get that memo until much later in life. I was, pretty much alone and unsupervised and just watching whatever I could find. And some of it wasn't the most appropriate, but it definitely shaped my impression of what comedy was. I was really into the sitcoms back in the day, of the Three's Company and All in the Family and Who's the Boss. There was just a ton of them. The 80s were just absolutely full of ones I can't even remember the names of, and I didn't understand every single joke because I was just little. But the thing with sitcoms, you get when things are funny, even if you don't quite understand it. So, it kind of it shaped my timing and just my understanding of how comedy worked at the time. My first impression or my first influence of my stand up would have to be there was a show, and I have trouble. I can't find it. There was a show, and it was called Comedy College. It was on like during the '80s at some point. It was fairly short lived, and it was like a game show. And you had three contestants that would get up. They'd do a stand up act, and the audience would vote them into the funny zone or the weird zone or the groan zone. And everyone that got in the funny zone, they did like a sudden death thing at the end, and then they won. I don't even remember what they would give them, but. So that was the first time I had ever seen stand-up comedy, and I thought that it was limited to this. This show had come up with the entire concept of people standing up and telling jokes, and I wondered why more people do it, and it didn't do it. And when this show went off the air, I was heartbroken. I was never going to be exposed to this again because I was really, really enjoying it. And God, it must have been probably like at least a year or more later, I found an Eddie Murphy VHS, and it was like Delirious or Raw. I was one of his early ones, and I watched that. I wore that thing out, and it opened the doors up to me realizing like, okay, I can go to the video store, and there's this whole section of people doing this, stand up, and I was just loving it. So I started discovering like so many, and and the ones that were pushing the envelope the most, again, you had Eddie Murphy, you had Richard Pryor, we had oh God, Dice for what it's worth. I mean, he did make an impact. Sam Kinison was just a profane genius. George Carlin, of course, the Second City guys. We had the original Saturday Night Live cast that were just just all the rules were being broken, and it was just so much amazing, genius work going on. And as I got older, it just continued. I was always attracted to the ones that were just, pushing the boundaries a little bit. Nowadays we got Bill Burr. We had Dennis Leary. Like, there's just, you name it. We have been very lucky to live in an era of comedy that we have, and that so many of the great ones their works have been preserved that we can go back and watch them and learn from them. So it's so hard to pick just like a narrow down influences when it's the entire industry that has evolved as such an art form that I think has shaped me more than anything.
What was your first time on stage like?
Oh, it was a goddamn nightmare. I can't even. Oh my God, I could barely put into words what that was. Just a trauma-filled experience I will remember until my dying day. Ah, wow. The first time you go on stage, it doesn't matter how much you've prepared and practiced. Watched open mics, and if you rehearse to the point where it's just almost muscle memory to get that 5 minutes of material out, like that's what I did. And the first time, it's still just there's nothing else like it. You never forget your first time doing it. It's just fear and excitement and more fear, and you don't even have a personality up on stage. You're just remembering your words, trying to get everything out. And to make it worse, the place where I did my first set, the way they worked out their open mics was a lotto system. So you would come in at the beginning of the night, and there would be a beer pitcher on the bar, and you would write your name on a little slip, and it would go. So you had no idea if or when you were going to be up there. And there was a lot of comics there trying to get their, spots up. So the odds weren't really in your favor of getting up. So when you did, it was a surprise. And you're already scared to death. And to have that uncertainty, like a complete unknown, and just out of nowhere, okay, this next comic is the very funny Barry James. Like, I have never done this a day in my life. The MC is just, now he's told these people I'm funny. What am I going to do with that now? I'm committed. I have to be funny in some way. And then you get up and you just try to remember everything. And I got through it. I was lucky. The material that I had wrote didn't require a ton of personality. It was just absolute it was filth. It was my filthy, dirty, nasty, profanity-filled crutch. And luckily, I was good enough at using that kind of profanity that I got a few laughs. And I was happy enough just to walk away with that. And I got better over time, but that first experience, I will never ever forget that one.
What's your favorite joke?
Oh, wow. Um, no, I just that's like, what's your favorite song or what's your favorite food or I there's no way I can narrow that down. Um, I couldn't even tell you my favorite of my own jokes just because I'm too critical of them. I hate everything I've ever wrote. But yeah, like I'm even right now. I'm trying to think of even like who's my favorite performer, and I can't do it. There's just so much out there to love and sample. It just to narrow down a favorite is just I'm just not capable of that. Sorry.
What's the worst heckler experience you've ever had?
I don't actually think I've had too many issues with hecklers, at least not yet. One of the things I learned, it was something I think Steve Martin had said that I took to heart when it came to hecklers, and I've just kind of adopted it as my own. I don't engage the audience. Like, first of all, you will never hear me do a set that starts with, "Hey, how's everybody doing tonight?" For one, the last six comics have opened with that, and for another, you're engaging them. You're engaging that audience, and if your bit is audience participation, obviously that's great. But for someone who's just wants to do their material, you don't want to be asking the audience things, because at that point now it's in their head that you want to hear from them, and based on how much beers they've had in them for that night, that can come out in all kinds of annoying ways. So I definitely try to just nip that off before it ever even happens. And I have a few strategies to like deal with hecklers if it does come up. But so far, my just the general delivery and the way I do my material doesn't tend to leave a lot of openings for them to get involved. And I'm happy with that. People are here to see me perform. They're not here to see you.
What's the best gig you've ever had?
Well, I guess the great thing about not having had too many, it's pretty easy to pick the favorites. I'd say, no matter what, it was a small crowd, but the fourth show I did, the one that was not an open mic, the one where, that was the first time I had let people in my life, my coworkers, my friends, my family know that, hey, I've actually been doing this on the side. Maybe you want to come check me out. And it was really cool that I had people that from different aspects of my life all coming together to support me. And that particular show, it was what's known as a bringer show. So your place on the roster and whatnot is based on how many people you bring. And I had a decent amount of people with me, so that made me look good to the promoter. So I was able to get more work through him, and it was an all around great show. It felt good. I felt comfortable. It was the first time that everything started feeling like it was clicking. It led to me actually getting a paid gig later. It was just, I think of everything, it was the one night where I don't think I could have asked for it to go any smoother.
What's the worst gig you've ever had?
Oddly enough, I would have to say the worst one is the first one that I got paid for. In spite of the excitement and the pride, in that, it was at a restaurant. And I don't know if you've ever done a set in a restaurant while people are eating, and it's not just, I like going to clubs where it's just chicken wings and fries and stuff and nice finger foods. This was an actual like restaurant. So there's like, it's knives, it's forks, it's plates, it's clinking glass. It's just, there's a lot of distraction going on, and people are having their own conversations even while you're doing your thing. It didn't feel good. It wasn't I didn't feel I had the flow, and it just wasn't an environment that I felt was, conducive to putting on an actual performance. But, if they're willing, if they want to have me back and they're still going to pay me, I'm more than happy to do it again.
How do you deal with stage fright?
Now, for me, I want to feel like I've got that beat. Never going to be an issue again. But yeah, I think if I was ever confronted by an arena-sized crowd or like a big platform, my advice might not be worth anything. But I was terrified when I started, and when I was doing the early open mics and the first few like regular gigs. Stage fright was always a huge thing. We call it stage fright, flop sweat, whatever you want to know it by. It is there, and it is ugly. But the first thing I like to remember is that if I wasn't feeling this way before putting on a performance, then that means I don't care about it anymore. My fear and excitement and all those like a million emotions that go through, and trying to remember my stuff, and just everything you feel before taking the stage is just a sign that you love what you are about to do. You want to do a good job so badly that you are terrified to fail. And that's not a great way to feel, but we're human beings, and that's how we do feel. The way I dealt with it, and it's worked for me up until now, is I still like to go to the open mics. And when you go to an open mic, there's a certain experience there. You're going to see, the headliner is going to be pretty okay, usually. And you'll see a few regulars that are there just, trying to refine stuff. And there's going to be some new ones. You're going to see some of the absolute worst comedic performances you will ever see in your entire life. You're going to see a guy stand there for 5 minutes talking about his bowel movement. You're going to see a guy in construction gear get up there and just thrust his hips at the microphone for like 5 minutes talking about, their broad I was banging the other night. It's so bad. But you are also going to see how those people deal when they're not getting the audience reaction they're looking for. The club that I like to go to, it's when, not even the crickets are making noise. That's how bored they are. And then there's a broken AC or a fan or something in the ceiling. So like someone will throw out a punchline. There's no laughs. All you hear is like, it's almost dead silence, except for this whoomp, 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 whoomp of this aging mechanism in the roof. It's tough. And you watch them after a while, and you just realize that, okay, this feels like it's as bad as it could get. And they're handling it. They are dealing with the silence. Some of them even make a little joke, to brush it off, which is better than anything else that they've had in their act. But the thing, once you see, you can visualize, okay, so if I'm up there, and this same thing happens to me. I mean, nobody's booing, nobody's throwing things. They're just, they brush it off. They either go sit down or they get out of the place, and then they come back a week later. It's going to be a whole new crowd, and there's just there's nothing that bad that can happen to you if you bomb. And we've heard so many times that even like the most seasoned professionals put on absolute garbage shows, sometimes on purpose, if you can believe that. When you get to the point where you are bombing on purpose, Like you have reached a whole other level. Um, but yeah, stage fright is it's there, but you can fight it, and eventually it becomes a motivator and a friend, and you understand what it's all about, and just use it.
What was the most unexpected response you've ever gotten to one of your jokes?
Uh, People laughed. I don't know. Honestly, I don't think I've ever had the experience, to be truthful. Not yet. I mean, when I tell a joke or a story or something, obviously my intended response is that somebody is going to laugh. My expected secondary response is that nobody's going to react. So I think so far everything that I've done has been met with one or the other of those things. I've gotten reactions to my performances that I wasn't expecting, positively, but I mean, those weren't just, a specific joke or anything. So yeah, I don't think I've had enough experience where I can find an unexpected response to a single joke yet.
How do you prepare for a show?
Oh, when I'm prepping for a show, I mean, there's a few different levels. So, like before the show, like days, weeks, even before, that's where you're setting up the index cards, you're lining up the set. How are you going to do it? I'm annoying my wife to no end over the material. I'm videotaping myself to see if I'm comfortable with my delivery. I'm just everything I can. I'm so meticulous because again, I'm so critical of myself, and I don't want to put on a bad show. So I'm trying to make sure every aspect of it is. If it's a new club, I go there a couple of days before so I get a look at the layout, where I'm going to be standing, what the lights are like, how bright everything is. I don't like going into situations where I don't, know my surroundings like that. And then once I'm actually at the show, it is two drinks and just keeping myself pumped and psyched and high energy, and that's it. That's the prep.
What's the best advice you've ever been given about stand up comedy?
I think the best advice that I ever got as far as stand up was more pertaining to the writing of it. And I really think that it's true. And that's when you sit down and you write a joke. You've made your observations, you've tried to flesh it out, you've written a joke. Sometimes you're gonna feel like you're about halfway through that joke and you're gonna realize that joke's not for you. If I did this joke, I just wrote this thing. And I'm thinking, if I went on stage and I told this joke, I will be beaten in the street afterwards. This is not something that I, whether due to, my race or my age or gender or any of that, this is not a joke. This is not my joke. But just because a joke doesn't feel right for you to tell doesn't mean get rid of it. Someday you don't know where your comedy journey is going to take you. Right now you're doing stand-up. Later you could be writing for a show. You could be doing sketch comedy. There could be a whole cast of characters. It could just be a friend that you're in stand-up with. Someday you are going to find the person that joke is for. And whether it's as a job, you're writing for someone, or you're just supporting and helping a co-performer, keep those jokes and work on them. When you're not working on your own stuff and refining your own set, there is room for things that aren't yours that you can just be creating for other people. Some of the, I think, greatest minds in comedy, with Seth Rogen and Judd Apatow, like that bunch. When it comes to stand up, they're not really, that's not their forte. But when it comes to writing material for other people, that's where they've always been shining. And that could be you. You just don't know. So whatever you write, if it's funny, keep it, work on it. Just don't feel like you have to use it yourself.
What's the worst advice you've ever been given about stand-up comedy?
The worst advice I've ever gotten, I think, was to just don't put so much effort into your preparation, be spontaneous and just let it flow and all that. And you know what, for some people that is wonderful. It's not advice I would ever give someone, because that is so much based off of your own personality and how you're able to quickly react to various situations you may find yourself in on stage. And for me, that would not work. I like to be as prepared as possible. And when you have very well-meaning comics who have been doing this a lot longer than you come up and they're willing to give their time and share this advice with you, it can be hard to discount it. They're the veteran. They blaze the trail for you. Their advice is important, and you should always ask for more and appreciate them and thank them and all that. But not every piece of advice is going to help you, and part of your career is going to be being able to filter that out, and what advice you're given is going to work well for you.
What would you say is the biggest misconception about stand-up comedy?
I think the biggest misconception I run across is when if you're at the point where you've started headlining some shows and you're getting a little bit of name recognition, your face is on some posters around town, your friends start to think that you have achieved a level of success maybe a little higher than reality would suggest. There are not a lot of spots for comics to make a living. You're doing the Netflix specials, and you're doing movies, and you're on the road all the time, and you're making millions of dollars just because you got a headline spot at some local place, or even like a Yuck Yucks. Just doing a just for laughs show and parlaying that into some headliner spots, it's a great step. You're achieving success in the field, but that by no means is defined by financial success at all. It is a very, very few that actually make it to those rarefied levels where you can live on this.
What do you believe is the key to success in stand-up comedy?
Oh man, wouldn't it be nice if we could just narrow it down to 3, bullet points or something? You do this, and I promise you will be rich and famous and successful and get all the sex you could possibly want on the road. It's going to be wonderful. No, this is like pretty much any other profession. You cannot predictably achieve success, but you can set yourself up as best as you can. Just be sensible. If you're booked for a show, show up on time. Follow the instructions. Like if the order is to work clean, you're not going to win any points by throwing a few F-bombs in there just because you are the edgy one. As far as just be courteous, be nice. You're going to meet a lot of people during this, and the way you treat them is going to affect how they react to you in the future. And you don't know where some of these people are going to end up. You may not have a whole lot of respect or like for someone's material, but you still treat them the same way, and you show them support, because a year from now they could be running a show that you want to be a part of. It's this is a community, and as a community we have to support each other to grow and be successful. And by following those normal hard work, preparation, treat others well, it seems so simple. But when the lucky breaks do come down the road, you have positioned yourself into a much better place where you can take advantage of those over someone who's just barely there, phoning it in and being a complete dick. So, it's not hard. Just try to be what you would want to have working for you, if that makes sense.
What do you think is the biggest obstacle that stand up comedians face?
Oh, well, I think right now the biggest obstacle, like all across comedy, really is where are the boundaries and should they be there? If we look back at the older legends of comedy and whatnot, you see like Carlin and all that, they were always pushing the edge of things, and that's what made them successful. It made you want to listen. Even like the Saturday Night Live crowd was always punching at the establishment, like oh my god, they're dressed like the president and they're making fun of him. Like it was polarizing and exciting, and it was one of the things that made comedy such an engine for social change, and gave it the power that it had. And now over the years it's evolved, and we've certainly had guys who basically just do their entire material around shock value, and maybe somewhat being abusive of other cultures, and racist and sexuality, all that sort of thing. And on one side you're going to have the crowd like, well, this is free speech. If you don't like it, then you don't have to buy a ticket. You don't need to come see me. You get a guy like Jimmy Carr, you know what he's doing before you buy that ticket. So if you go there to his show, you get exposed to, abortion jokes and pedophilia and spousal abuse, all this stuff. That is kind of on you, because you have put yourself in that line of fire. But when you're a newer comic and that's your material and you're just taking spots anywhere, it's kind of hard to justify using that sort of material when everybody's going to be exposed to it. And that's again where we'll have the people on both sides of that, because the ones like the free speech crowd, like, well, those people are snowflakes, they should know how to take a joke. And the other ones are just feeling like, if they're in the rainbow community, they're feeling persecuted, they're feeling bullied. And it's a tough call, because if the definition, if all it takes to be comedy is to be funny, then bullying is right there. Bullying is funny. If you've ever experienced doing it to somebody, as a child in the schoolyard, whatever, you and your friends are doing it, you're having some laughs, you're trying to one up each other. You have an audience usually, and they're laughing. Maybe the only people that aren't is the person you're doing it to, and maybe there'll be a couple of people there that are just kind of not liking what you're doing, but they're not really standing up. But at the same time, that's like a 98% success rate. In what world is that not a win in comedy? But again, it comes down to comedy is a powerful thing. We talked about how it is it can make massive changes. It has a power unlike anything. The only thing comparable would be maybe music can have the same effect on people. And to use that, something with that much power, to use that on a human being in an effort to hurt them or marginalize them in some way, just feels wrong. But is what I feel justification for someone else to not be able to do that material? It's questions like that I think comics now have to ask themselves, whereas before you never did. In the 80s and the early 90s and what, you didn't have to worry about people's feelings. You not everyone was going to like your material, but everyone was going to support your right to say it. And as we started becoming more socially aware, you know what, let's give it, as we became more woke, then those lines changed a little bit. The boundaries weren't set by the establishment and the powerful. The boundaries became more about just not being cruel to each other, and being accepting of each other's beliefs, and it would be nice if we had a middle ground where we could poke fun at all of this stuff together without being cruel. If we as people could learn the difference, between those situations. We're not there yet. I'm optimistic that we will get there someday, once we just get along for a while. And yeah, like I say, it's just that I think the moral boundaries that we each have to set for ourselves, and knowing that our friends and family are going to be watching us, and what we give as comics is a very real reflection of who we are as people. And I think that's more prevalent than ever before. And it's definitely an obstacle between you and just the absolute free run of your mouth that comedy has always been before.
What do you think sets stand-up comedy apart from other forms of comedy?
Oh, stand up is just unlike any other, obviously. It's raw, and it's visceral, and it's just you versus an audience. Anything can happen. It can be dangerous, it can be scary, it can be so many things. You're not protected by a screen, or a page, or any of these things. You are just it's you and them. You are giving an energy to a crowd of people, and that crowd is taking that energy, and they're enhancing it, and growing it, and changing it, and then they're sending it right back to you, and you're absorbing that back. It's the symbiotic relationship that I don't think you get in any other industry at all, much less forms of comedy. And it's just, there's nothing else in this world that feels anything like it.
What are the benefits of stand-up comedy?
Well, I mean, aside from the big picture stuff, I mean, we talked earlier about how, comedy is an engine for change in the world, and it has the power to accomplish so much. From a more personal, human perspective, if you are going to do stand up, what's it going to do for you? I think it definitely changes you. I was a complete introvert before I started doing this. I would never even dream, like, the thought of giving my own opinion on things, like, terrified me. And, much less thinking anyone should actually listen to it, or God forbid actually pay me for it. But it definitely, it brings something out of you. And it makes you able to deal with the world, to deal with people. Maybe for a lot of your life, you felt that wasn't something you were comfortable doing. And doing stand-up is a great way to practice how you communicate, what you're giving of yourself out into the world. And then you see what they give you back. And that's an incredible feeling that you will not get anywhere else. As you get better, you get people coming up to you. Like, have you ever experienced in your life, doing something, and then going, having a seat afterwards, and just people coming up to you out of nowhere, and just, they'll buy you a drink, they'll tell you did great, they want to sit and talk to you, they want your advice on things. You feel important. You have cemented yourself as, this is my place in the world, and accept me. And I think that's something a lot of us would feel a lot better if we had. So I definitely, even if you only did it once, just to try it out and say you did it, I think it's definitely worth it for anybody to try doing this.
What's your process for writing jokes?
I think my process is just pretty bog standard, really. Everywhere I go, anytime, if I see something, hear something, conversation, that triggers that would be really funny if, and it just gives you ideas. Nowadays, there's no reason to not be able to jot things down. We all have phones. We've got the little notepad apps. You can dictate into things. I just take little notes, and then at the end of every day, I go through any notes that I've written, and then I try and work them out into full concepts. And then I'll spend time over the next, weeks or whatever, just fleshing them out into full jokes and organizing them in folders and then writing the final thing down on the little index cards. And then you put the index cards down on the table and work them in different orders, figure out little transitions between them, what's going to work best for what kind of crowd. It's a whole process there. And yeah, if you do it right and you're good at that process, you can definitely achieve success like that.
What's the most important thing for a stand-up comedian to remember?
I think the biggest thing that you need to remember as a stand-up comic is that there's a place for you. You may obviously, like, through some of the stuff I've said, I think of comedy as it's an art form. It has immense power. I think of it as this great, magical, wonderful thing. You don't have to think of it that way. You don't have to do it for a living. You can do this once a month, once every 6 months. You can do it as a hobby. You can do it as a profession. You can do it because you want to get laid. You can do it because you want to make friends. You can do it because you're working on yourself. There's as many different reasons to do stand-up comedy as there are people doing it, and every single one of them is valid. And whether you think you're good at it or you're just learning or whatever it is, there is a place for you in the community. All you have to do is step into it. As long as you do, there's going to be welcoming people that will help you every step of the way, and you'll do great.
What do you think are the best techniques for dealing with hecklers?
Well, again, not a ton of experience dealing with the stuff. Another one I ripped off from Steve Martin, though. I kind of like lower your voice a little bit. Let the person drown you out. Now, the crowd has perceived this as they have now lost some of their entertainment in the night because of this dude not shutting up. And as that goes on, they're going to turn on him. He's or she or her. And they're going to feel that vibe after a while, and that's going to shut them up most of the time. There are certain looks you can give. The key is do not engage. They are not part of the show, should never be made to feel like they're part of the show. No one has paid money to come there and see them. Your responsibility is to perform for this crowd, and you need to keep control of your show.
What do you think are the biggest mistakes that stand-up comedians make?
The biggest mistake, I think, has got to be just not being prepared for things, the crowd that you're working with, and not having enough variety of material so that even if you do recognize the differences in crowd, you can't do anything about it. I know just an endless number of comics, and I was guilty of it in my first show, but the profanity that just becomes a crutch, and when it's funny, that's not even so bad. I mean, for some crowds, you're in a younger crowd, you can get away with it. It's fine. But when you base your whole act on it, and it's your go-to, is when you're going to run into problems over time. You need to have some clean stuff, enough to do at least a full set if you have to. Most of the higher paid jobs are like that. You're not going to be able to get away with talking about your poop for 20 minutes. It doesn't work. It's not funny. And really, I think it's just, another is focusing too much on current events, the political stuff. It has such a short shelf life. I think if you're really working with that a lot, you're neglecting, some really good timeless material that you'll be able to use for years if you need to. But if you're focusing on like political stuff, I mean, aside from like the fact that you've just instantly alienated about 50% of your crowd, depending on what side you come down on with the politics, it's just really not worth the risk versus reward. It just isn't there. I don't think anyway. Some people are very good at it though. Bill Burr, I mean, when it comes to like the politics and stuff, he manages to ride it fairly close down the middle, and he slays every time he does it. So this advice goes to everyone except Bill Burr. Bill, you are immune to it.
What is the best way to learn stand-up comedy?
I think if you're in the position to do it, classes are second to none. I think every club locally that you might have in your neighborhood, they'll probably have some kind of a class going on. Um, they tend to range, $200 to $400. You'll get 6 to 8 weeks of like workshopping. They'll set you, you'll have a good solid 5 minutes by the end of the thing, and then you're guaranteed to get on a show at the end. You're working with people that you've built a relationship with over a couple of months. There's no substitute for those kind of connections you're going to make. And so if you can afford it, that I'd say would be the number one. If not, there's online options. There's books. Judy Carter has a good one. The New Comedy Bible is one of my favorites. It won't make you a sensation overnight, but it will teach you organizational skills and work ethic. And I think if you have those two things and you really, are confident in those, you're automatically head and shoulders above a lot of the other people who haven't focused on any of that. There's online Udemy.com is a site that teaches, that has online courses at a very reasonable price most of the time. There's comic courses there. The masterclass.com has a couple of good ones as well. You've heard me mention things I've learned from Steve Martin over time. A lot of that came from his masterclass. It not only teaches you aspects of the craft, but you really get it. It's great motivation and inspiration for you to really put a lot of yourself into it, and lets you know that no matter what point of your life you're at, you can do it, and there is a place for you. So yeah, there's no shortage of ways to learn. It's the only thing that's stopping you from learning is yourself. If you have the interest, the things are there. And of course, no matter what, keep performing, get stage time. There's no substitute for actual work. And you do all of that, and you have as good a chance of succeeding as anybody else.
What do you think is the best way to improve as a stand-up comedian?
I struggled a little bit with this one. I used to think that the only way to get better was to keep performing, and that is definitely true without a doubt. But if you don't know what mistakes you're making, I'm not sure how you would ever be able to improve. So I think the addition to the statement "keep performing," I think you need to add "keep performing and record every time." Yeah, bring your phone with you. You can get a little tripod off Amazon for $10, sits on the table. Just watch what you're doing. Listen to you'll have, not only will you be recording yourself, you'll be recording the response that you're getting. When you're on stage, it's really easy to think maybe it's a little bit quieter than it is, or you're getting laughs that you're not, depending on your state of mind at the time. There's no substitute for being able to actually look at the damning evidence afterwards to see exactly how much you suck. And then when you get that, you can say, okay, well, I liked how I did this. I like the response I got from this. I'm going to work on this. And, it really helps. Record every time you do a set. And I'm sure there's 100 other ways that you can improve and little adjustments you can make, and have a little community around you to judge you and all this kind of thing. But I think you're your own worst critic, and that's the way it should be. And like you say, record. That's the one word answer: record.
What has stand-up comedy taught you about yourself?
It's taught me that I'm friggin' awesome. um, you know what? It's definitely taught me that I'm good at some things. Like when I didn't feel that way at times in my life, it has taught me that I'm a better communicator than I thought I was. I still, this podcast will definitely be evidence enough that I do tend to ramble a little bit when I have a lot to say, but it it's definitely taught me to be what I consider a better person. And my friends and family, I think, have agreed that it's made me more outgoing. I've learned that I can be a person that I used to only wish I could be. And once I learned that was possible, it made me want to do it even more and make myself realize I could mold myself. And when we think of ourselves as these malleable lumps of clay, once we start realizing that what we are is not necessarily totally based off the trauma we went through as a child, or our heartbreak that we had 10 years ago, and we just keep just reliving in our minds over and over and over again. That's not you. That's not me. That's an illusion that we keep ourselves locked into. And stand up has taught me that no, we can. That I can free myself from that. I am not going to be in this prison of my own mind. I'm going to get out there, and I'm going to spread my wings, and I'm going to try and be the person that my family, my parents, ancestors, whatever, like they would have wanted me to be. And I think that's the best thing it's ever taught me.
What motivates you to keep performing stand up comedy?
That has got to be the most ridiculous question I've ever heard in my life. No, I'm sorry. No, honestly, it's just when you it's the experience. You go and you hear your name called, and you feel it's the feeling of like your first kiss or the first time, you know, like it's electric. It's an experience like there's absolutely nothing else in the world. And when it goes well, and you have you have struck a chord in the audience, and that they love what you've done, and something you've put out there has done some good or made people feel good, or anything, and you do this even night after night, it's a feeling that doesn't get old. I can't imagine uh losing motivation for it. I mean, I guess if you're traveling a lot, you're doing a lot of stuff on the road, you miss your family, there's aspects of anything that would get tedious, I suppose, but I don't think anybody or anything would ever take away the feeling I get from performing.
What advice would you give to someone who's thinking about doing stand up comedy?
Do it. Just do it. Start going to those amateur nights, watching people perform, realize, this is, the level that you're shooting for is pretty low. Um, sack up, get up there and do it. Every day, every minute that you are not making forward steps, if you are thinking of doing it, every minute you're not, you are depriving yourself of the greatest feeling in the world. And I can't think of a worse crime you could do to yourself. Get up, get out, do it.
Is there anything you'd like to add that we did not cover?
Yeah, and then I think we'll wrap this up, because right now my voice is starting to give out, and my dogs are looking for a little bit of attention. So seems like a good ending point for us. I just wanted to point out that stand-up comedy is a true art form. It is people taking something from them inside themselves, molding it, and then presenting it to the world, just like any other art form that you might think of. But a lot of people don't think of stand up as an art that needs to be supported if we want to keep it alive and thriving and growing. So if you are an art supporter of any kind, I would strongly encourage you to just check out what's out there. See what amazing talents are growing all of the time, and see if your support can truly help this community keep being the force for social change that it always has been. It's truly a magical, creative, crazy, insane, sometimes offensive, sometimes just it is. There's nothing else like it, and we all need to work together to make sure that it is preserved and allowed to grow into the next century. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you at a show soon.
I've been your host, Rob Chaffee. Don't forget to laugh today. It's good for you. Comedy Reset Spotlight is a podcast that brings you today's freshest and funniest comedy creators. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to hear more.